Spain in the 1930s was a nation divided along almost every line imaginable. Class, religion, politics, land reform. All of these threatened to unravel the old order. Either overlooked or seen as a mere prelude to World War II, the Spanish Civil War pitted various ideologies against one another. Traditionalists fought Republicans, anarchists fought communists, liberals fought reactionaries. Volunteers from all over the world flocked to Spain, some to fight what they considered to be yet another Bolshevik insurrection, and others to strike down fascism to secure their newfound liberties. Within months, the war quickly gained an international dimension, becoming a microcosm of the ideological clashes that would ensue decades after Franco's victory. Many famous people would be forged in the fires of that conflict. Ernest Hemmingway, Martha Gellhorn, George Orwell, future Soviet generals, famous anti-fascists, and so many others. And each came for their own reasons. Hemmingway went to report on the conflict, as did Gellhorn. Orwell volunteered directly to fight against the nationalists. But many of these people saw the Civil War as part of an international struggle, one of revolutionaries versus reactionaries. And yet, ideology was just one part of it. For the Spanish Republicans, this was their war, a struggle they had to win themselves in order to secure a free future for their country. Only they could really understand the cultural underpinnings of the violence, of why Catalonia was anarchist, or how the Spanish peasantry had so eagerly devoted themselves to an ideology few of them really understood. And this is where Arturo Barea enters the picture. In this video, we'll be exploring the life and experiences of the most prolific writer of the Civil War era, of the man who could see beyond the hatred of conflict, to understand the truth of what it means to struggle in a world seemingly gone mad. If you have no clue about anything relating to the Spanish Civil War, then don't worry, I've got your back. Fought between July 1936 and April 1939, the war broadly saw the left-wing forces of the Second Spanish Republic unite against a revolt by right-wing nationalists, each side hell-bent on defending what they saw as their way of life. And Spain in 1936 wasn't doing great, to put it lightly. Ever since Napoleon's invasion in 1808, Spain had lost its position as a great power. Its overseas empire, once vast, had now gradually dwindled to nothing, as wars against America and other European states saw it lose territory, whilst countries in South America declared their independence. With the loss of Cuba and the Philippines to the US in 1898, Spain was a shadow of its former self, the new backwater of southern Europe. Its populace was largely illiterate, and poor even by the standards of the time. Spain did experience a brief stint of prosperity during World War I, when it sold goods to both the Entente and Central Powers, but like always, the good times didn't last. Though a Pyrrhic victory for Spain, the Rift War in colonised Morocco fought in the 1920s saw thousands of deaths and a new hatred for the monarchy, and in 1931 the monarchy was overthrown, and the Second Spanish Republic was proclaimed. With it came a new bunch of liberal reforms to better the lives of the peasantry, which, if you're rich, is very bad news. Factions of the Spanish army, the Catholic Church, and rich landowners opposed the Republic, wishing for a return to the old order. With the entry of fascism into the European political mainstream, many right-wing elements viewed it as a viable alternative to left-wing policies. In July 1936, the Republic had seen many governments come and go. Little had been done in 5 years, and radical sections of both the left and the right believed then was the time to act. With the revolt of Spanish army units led by Morocco veteran Francisco Franco and others against the government, Republicans joined hands either to defend it or to go a step further and embrace complete revolution. Liberals, social democrats, Marxists of every stripe, backed by the Soviets or foreign anti-fascists, would fight for almost 3 years. Franco's nationalists would secure victory just months before the Nazi invasion of Poland. And there to witness it all was Arturo Barea. Born in 1897 to a washerwoman in Madrid, Barea always straddled the divide between rich and poor. He would go to school in a fancy uniform only to return hungry in the evening. Over the course of his life, he would have many jobs, from working in a bank to fighting in the Spanish Morocco to creating industrial patents, until he found himself working directly for the Republican government. From a young age, he was inquisitive, quickly learning to question the teachings of the Catholic Jesuits, and fiercely independent. Partly adopted by his wealthy aunt and uncle, he had the rare opportunity to go to school, in a time when Spanish peasants only received a few years of basic education. From the onset, Barea became aware of the sharp class divides in Madrid, noting in his autobiography that the oddest thing was that there were many poor boys who were not poor, and many rich boys who were not rich. In the non-paying forms, there were sons of tradesmen from the quarter, whose fathers had a very good business. And in the forms upstairs, there were sons of civil servants whose fathers had to starve themselves so that their boys could shine at school among the rich pupils. And these two groups showed off most, one as being poor and the other as being rich. Like most kids of the time, Barea started work at the ripe old age of 13, this time as an apprentice copyist in a bank where he copied checks and balances. It was here where he became aware of deep labour exploitation of people like himself. For example, each apprenticeship was unpaid and usually lasted a year, and during that period the bank could sack an employee at any time without any given reason. If they reapplied, they had to restart the year, again without pay. Barea soon quit his job after being accused of breaking a glass plate, and took on a series of odd jobs until his military service finally brought him to Morocco in 1921, to one of the few remaining Spanish colonies. Over the course of his military service, Barea became exposed to the culture that existed within the Spanish army. He rose to the rank of sergeant in the engineering corps, and came to understand exactly the rationale used by officers and soldiers to justify their involvement in Morocco, in a time when imperialism was increasingly scrutinized on the world stage. For those that had been in Morocco for decades, the prospect of withdrawing was disastrous. Unemployment remained high in Spain, and without any specialised skills, ex-soldiers would likely join the endless lines of hungry men looking for work, and so colonial warfare became their way of life. As soon as war was declared against the Moroccan separatist forces of Abd el-Karim, Spaniards debated whether they should abandon the protectorate, thus putting an end to Spain's overseas empire for good. As an officer, Barea witnessed the horrific conditions that Spanish soldiers experienced. Poor training, corruption, and equipment shortages were just the tip of the iceberg. Military blunders like Anual and other battles exposed just how incompetent the Spanish officer class was, and galvanized Barea against the suffering of peasant conscripts. After contracting typhus, Barea was sent back to Spain, where by pure luck he met the one and only Primo de Rivera. Primo de Rivera was a prominent general that had become Prime Minister of Spain after a military coup in 1923. After drinking as much as a student at a house party, Primo asked Barea of his opinion on the Moroccan fiasco and what he should do about it. At first hesitant, Barea replied that they should just abandon it so as to save as many people as possible, to which Primo surprisingly agreed. In his youth, Barea had always aspired to be an engineer and writer, and soon decided to leave the army upon returning to Morocco in 1925. When he returned to Madrid, he was soon given a job by an acquaintance and set about readjusting into civilian life. But the same couldn't be said for Primo de Rivera. In 1930, he would die just 2 months after being ousted from power, having done little to actually help Spain during his 7-year tenure. In 1931, the monarchy was overthrown, and with the Spanish Second Republic proclaimed, people were cautiously optimistic for a new era of liberalism, one that was far removed from the authoritarianism of the 1920s. Over the next 5 years, Barea would have a family and a well-paid job creating patents for industrial inventions. But after buying a country home in a local village, he witnessed what was happening all over rural Spain. Instead of adhering to new laws entailing fair pay to workers, wealthy landowners and businessmen simply fired those who demanded better conditions and hired anyone who accepted lower wages, creating mass unemployment and discontent. As a newcomer to the village, Barea was quickly presented with a choice. He could either associate himself with the landowners or the workers, by sticking to either the casino or the local tavern. Barea chose to frequent the workers' tavern after visiting both, showing his loyalty to the values of the Republic. Having witnessed the peasants' misery and ever practical, Barea decided to politically organise the village using his contacts, and allowed speakers of various left-wing movements to come and convince the locals to join them. Amongst their ranks included a socialist, a communist, an anarchist, and of course a Republican. Already apparent was Barea's personal capacity for political pluralism. Instead of rigidly declaring himself a communist or a socialist, he regarded different shades of left-wing thought as equally valid in the fight against the landowners. With the village now mobilised, Barea experienced his first major foray into politics, at a time when Spain was about to burn with the flames of war. And it would all begin with the general election of 1936. In this election, the leftist Popular Front came into power, and led to mass peasant action against the landowners. Many were shot, their properties were seized, whilst worker councils and trade unions swiftly sprang up across the country. Alarmed with what many on the right considered to be a Bolshevik conspiracy, factions of the military staged a coup and issued an ultimatum to the new government to step down. The new government of course refused, and by August the Iberian Peninsula was about to be engulfed in total war. With rapid advances and support from Moroccan units, the nationalist armies took control of vast swathes of northwestern Spain, and soon began to besiege Madrid. In the eyes of the Popular Front, the siege of Madrid would decide the fate of the Republic. Workers and members of the anarchist CNT unions, those of the communists and socialists raided barracks and armed themselves. Whilst the Republic initially outnumbered the nationalists 10-1, they had made the brilliant decision to disband the military prior to the war. As such, what forces they did have were militias, well motivated but ultimately inexperienced and very poorly armed. As a long-time member of the UGT, the largest socialist trade union, Barea did his part by training workers in the use of rifles and equipping them before he was approached by an old comrade with an interesting offer. With knowledge of French, Barea had been sought by the foreign ministry to act as a censor for foreign reports. As the world became aware of Spain's plight, careful work was needed to persuade it that the Republican cause was worth fighting for. Anything implying a nationalist victory or fear-mongering was ruthlessly censored as the Republic desperately pleaded its case, in the hopes of receiving weapons and support from other countries. Always the introspective, Barea became disillusioned with the impact of his work, and would experience bouts of PTSD and visceral nightmares as the siege of Madrid wore on. The constant exposure to civilian suffering and violence, and the lingering threat of death drove him to near insanity. In his autobiography, he wrote of a particularly horrific episode. An infinite terror invaded me. Now, at that very moment, the shelling was going to start afresh. I would be tied to my bed, unable to move or to protect myself. The others would go down to the basement and leave me alone. I battled desperately. The drug had worked upon the motorial nerve center and I could not move. My will did not want to submit. It did not want to sleep or to let me go to sleep. Sleep meant the danger of death. Beyond the horrors of the war, Barea also suffered from a war of the mind. His relationships, both with his mistress and wife, had deteriorated, made worse as he found a new partner in Ilse Kalksar, a fellow independent socialist and censorer. As 1937 slipped into 1938, the Republican situation became ever bleaker. The nationalists were continually receiving vast material support from Italy and Nazi Germany, allowing them to gain an upper hand against the Republic. Short-lived Republican victories at Guadalajara and Jarama did little to bolster the waning morale of the Popular Front. The liberal democracies of Europe could only stand by and watch. Only the Soviet Union continued to support the Republic, but even that would have a price. Not even the international brigades, once hailed as a vanguard of global anti-fascism, could stem the tide. As the left-wing militias were gradually replaced by an organised professional army with Soviet support, the communists gained ever more power within the Republican government. They squeezed control from the socialists and alienated the anarchists that continued to dominate Catalonia. But leaving the country he had been born and raised in was no easy feat. One thing that Barea would always lament was the inability for the Popular Front to truly put aside its petty squabbling and unite against the fascists. Writing in his autobiography, he decried such foolishness. It is very Spanish to let oneself be blinded only to rob a neighbour of his eye, as the proverb says. So it could happen that anarchists were pleased when communists were attacked by Phalange, and that communists did their best to attack the anarchists by means of official oppression, coming from a government equally hostile to the communists themselves. I think all of us who did not belong to a party bureaucracy counted those divisions and subdivisions of the left over and over again in mental despair. And yet, it seems to me now that in stressing the splits of the Spanish left, we were and are falling into a grave error. In May of 1937, fighting erupted on the streets of Barcelona between factions of the anarchists and the communists. Such a catastrophic breakdown in the Popular Front heralded potential disaster for the war effort. As George Orwell wrote in Homage to Catalonia, the communists sat not upon the extreme left, but the extreme right of the Republic's political landscape. With the anarchists declaring the need for immediate revolution, and the communists following Moscow's directive for order, conflict between the two was inevitable. As the rope tightened around their necks, Barea and his new wife fled the crumbling Republic to France, where they survived by borrowing money from friends and writing articles. By early 1939, Madrid had been under siege for more than 2 years, and though it hadn't fallen, it now lay cut off from Republican forces. It was no longer a question of if the Republic, once a dream of Spanish liberalism, would fall, but simply a matter of when. Prior to the departure of his country to which he would never return, Barea confessed to a friend, one of the few Catholic priests loyal to the Republic of his true feelings. Even as the Republic was on its knees, he still believed in a free Spain, without persecution or poverty. This was not just a civil war, but Spain's bloodbath. As countrymen killed one another, that hope of a free Spain was dashed. Yet where could the blame be pinned? Unlike many of his contemporaries, Barea remained surprisingly partisan in his writings. He despised Franco and the landowners, of course, but placed the blame on the cyclical nature of violence. He abhorred the conditions that had shaped tyrannical men like Franco, with reasons being the crippling poverty, the brutal battles of Morocco, and so many others. Anyone that tried to stand against it and bring change would have to suffer. I had believed, I still believed, in a new free Spain of free people. I had wanted it to come without bloodshed, by work and goodwill. What could we do if this hope, this future, was being destroyed? We had to fight for it. Had we to kill others? I knew that the majority of those who were fighting with arms in hand, killing or dying, did not think about it, but were driven by the forces unleashed or by their blind faith. But I was forced to think. For me, this killing was a sharp and bitter pain which I could not forget. When I heard the battle noise, I saw only dead Spaniards on both sides. Whom should I hate? Oh yes, Franco and Juan March, and their generals and puppets and wire pullers, the privileged people over there. But then I would rather hate that God who gave them the callousness which made them kill, and who punished me with the torture of hating any killing, and who let women and children first suffer from rickets and starvation wages, and then from bombs and shells. We were caught in a monstrous mechanism, crushed under the wheels, and if we rebelled, all the violence and all the ugliness was turned against us, driving us to violence. Arturo Barea and his wife would later escape to England, where he remained until his death in 1957, almost 20 years after the Civil War. In an era when mutual understanding and simple human decency seemed alien, Barea's works demonstrated that the hopes for a future free from the cycle of violence remained. But neither was Barea necessarily a good person. For all his romantic prose, he was a rampant womanizer. He left his family to the mercy of Francoist Spain. But at the end of the day, he was human. In the words of his priestly compatriot, the Republican soldiers learnt that true victory doesn't involve killing, but convincing people that your way of life is better. In the end, the Republicans would lose, but they would also win. Even with all the brutality in the world, Franco would fail to truly conquer the Spanish people. In 1977, just 2 years after Franco's death, Spain would hold its first democratic elections in more than 40 years. To this day, Spain is an integral part of the EU and a staunch supporter of European democracy. At the end of it all, Barea knew that one day human decency would prevail, and prevail it did. Thank you so much for watching, and as I'm reading now through the word count of the script, I realise that this is probably going to be my longest ever video. I based this video off The Forging of a Rebel, which is Barea's autobiography. It's really long, like 750 pages, but probably now one of my favourite books of all time. As you can probably tell, my throat is absolutely shot. I can't feel anything. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like and drop a comment. Subscribe to stay up to date. And like always, this has been Iravic, and I will see ya in the next one.